On my wedding day, in the luxurious hall filled with lights, my father, the man who had sacrificed his entire life to raise me, was arranged to sit in a dark corner next to the trash area, as if he were invisible. He wasn't allowed to speak, wasn't even mentioned by name, all to preserve the bride's family's face in front of the guests. I clenched my teeth, my heart shattering into pieces, until a voice rang out. The mayor, the guest of honor, suddenly stood up. He pointed toward my father and said, "Today, the most respected person here is none other than that man." The entire room fell silent, and the reaction immediately after left the bride's entire family stunned. Hello, my name is Hudson. I'm 29 years old, and I stand here in the midst of a life that sometimes even I find hard to believe I've come this far. But for you to fully understand my story, I have to go back to the beginning. The days etched into my memory like a deep cut, even though time has tried to erase them. This is the story about me, about my father, and about the years of poverty that forged the person I am today. I was born in a small town nestled between fields of golden wheat and dusty red dirt roads that kicked up clouds whenever a vehicle passed. Our house was an old wooden shack on the edge of town where the streetlights never reached. My father, Thomas, was the only man I knew who could be as strong as an oak tree and as gentle as the full moon. But his life, like our small family, was twisted by an unforeseen pain. My mother passed away when I was only 5 years old. It was an autumn day, the sky unusually clear and blue, but the atmosphere in the house was heavy, as if the whole world was pressing down on my chest. She had an illness, one that I still don't fully understand to this day, only knowing that it took her away too quickly. One morning she was still sitting by the window, her golden hair shining under the sun, softly singing the lullaby I heard every night. Yet just a few weeks later, she lay there on the cold hospital bed, her eyes closed forever. I was too young to understand what death was, but I clearly remember the emptiness when my father held me in his arms, his tears soaking my shirt. "It's just the two of us now, Hudson," he whispered, his voice choked but trying to stay calm, as if afraid that if he collapsed, I would vanish too. My father, Thomas, had once been a promising construction engineer. Before I was born, he worked for a big company in the city, where his blueprints turned into bridges and high-rise buildings. People said he had golden hands, able to look at an empty plot of land and envision an entire future built upon it. But after my mother's death, he gave it all up. He turned down a major promotion, a high-paying job in the big city, just to stay in this town where he could take care of me himself. "You're all I have left," he told me once, when I was a bit older and started asking about my mother, about the days I no longer remembered clearly. Life for the two of us wasn't easy. My father worked on small projects around town, sometimes building walls for a farm, other times fixing roofs for some family. The work was unstable, the pay meager, but he never let me go without. Every morning he woke up early to prepare breakfast for me, usually just toasted bread with homemade strawberry jam, but to me it was the best food in the world. He sat across from me, smiling, telling stories about the projects he'd worked on, about the bridges he dreamed of building. "One day, Hudson," he said, "you'll do even greater things than your father." But what I admired most about my father wasn't his engineering talent, but the heart he had for everyone. In our small town, he was known as a silent hero. Neighbors needed their plumbing fixed. He'd come right away, rain or shine. Someone needed a coop built for their chickens. He'd bring his tools and work all day without taking a single penny. Once old Mrs. Mary at the end of the street had her roof leaking during a storm, flooding her living room. My father gave up his only day off that week, climbed onto the roof and patched every little hole in the pouring rain. When Mrs. Mary tried to give him some money, he just smiled and waved it off. "Consider it my exercise to stay healthy." I stood there watching him drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, but his smile brighter than the sun. In those years, despite the poverty, I never felt deprived of love. My father taught me how to work hard, how to treat people kindly, and how never to let circumstances define who I am. Every evening after I finished my homework, he would sit by the fireplace telling me about my mother, about how she loved the wildflowers growing by the roadside, about how she laughed when he tried to sing her favorite song off-key. Those stories, though sad, always made me feel like she was still there somehow, like a gentle breeze passing through our lives. But I didn't always understand my father's sacrifices. When I turned 10, I started noticing the differences between our family and others. My friends had new clothes, fancy toys, while I wore hand-me-downs from my cousins and played with toys my father made from scrap wood. Once a classmate teased me about my torn shoes, and I came home angry, throwing them into the corner of the room. My father looked at me, said nothing, and quietly took the shoes to fix them. That evening, he sat down beside me, placing the neatly patched shoes in front of me. "Hudson," he said, his voice deep but firm, "your worth isn't in the shoes you wear, but in how you walk through this life." In those years, I learned that poverty wasn't something to be ashamed of, but it also wasn't easy to accept. Every time I saw my father come home, his back bent from exhaustion, his hands calloused from work, I promised myself that one day I would change this life, not just for me, but for him too. I started studying harder, spending hours at my desk in the small room where the oil lamp flickered whenever the wind blew through the cracks in the door. My father was always there, silently watching, never pushing, but his eyes full of expectation. Our town was small, but it held my entire world. The red dirt roads, the wheat fields, and the old wooden house were where I grew up, where my father had spent his whole life shielding me. But deep down, I knew our story wouldn't end there. My youthful years were a long journey of effort and perseverance. I wasn't a genius, lacking any innate talents that would make others marvel. But I had my father, and he taught me that sometimes the only thing you need is to never give up. Every evening when the oil lamp flickered in our wooden house, I sat at the study table, diligently solving math problems, writing essays, and dreaming of the day I could stand before my father and say, "I've done it, Dad." I clearly remember the year I turned 15 when I first won a scholarship from high school. It was a small scholarship, just enough to buy books and pay tuition, but to me it was like a gold medal. That evening I ran home, clutching the scholarship notification paper, panting from running and laughing. My father was standing in the kitchen, his hands still covered in flour from kneading dough for bread. I handed him the paper, my heart pounding. He read it, said nothing, just placed his hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. But I saw his eyes glistening and his smile. Oh, that smile, as if the whole world had suddenly lit up. "You've made me so proud, Hudson," he said, his voice deep but full of weight. That was the first time I truly felt that my efforts weren't just for me, but for both of us. I passed the university entrance exam for a technical school in the big city, hundreds of miles away from our town. On the day I left home, my father saw me off at the bus station, holding an old suitcase he had used back when he was still an engineer. He handed it to me, saying, "This has been with me through many projects. Now it will go with you." I hugged him, trying to hold back tears, but as the bus rolled away, I looked out the window and saw him standing there, his back slightly hunched, waving until his figure faded from view. I knew that leaving the town wasn't just leaving my father behind, but stepping into a completely new world where I had to face every challenge on my own. University was a grueling journey. I didn't have fancy clothes like my classmates, no money for eating out or joining parties, but I had a clear goal. I wanted to become an engineer like my father, but I wanted to go further than him. Not just building small bridges, but large projects, skyscrapers. I studied day and night, working part-time at a coffee shop near the school to cover expenses. There were nights when I was so exhausted that I just wanted to give up. But then I would remember my father, remember his calloused hands, remember the days he stood in the rain patching roofs for neighbors. I told myself, if Dad could do all that for me, then I must do all this for him. After 4 years of relentless hard work, I graduated with honors. On the day I received my diploma, I stood in the grand hall, surrounded by hundreds of students and their families. I looked down at the audience, searching for my father. He was sitting in the back row wearing an old suit he had worn to a friend's wedding many years ago. It didn't fit perfectly, but he still looked dignified. When my name was called, I saw him stand up clapping, his smile radiant like the sun. I wanted to run down, hug him, and tell him that everything I had achieved that day was thanks to him. After university, I was hired by a large construction company in the city. I started as an apprentice engineer, but thanks to my diligence and the foundation my father had taught me, I quickly caught attention. Just 3 years later, I was promoted to project manager. My job involved overseeing major projects, bridges and buildings that I had dreamed of as a child. Every time I stood before a completed structure, I thought of my father, of the blueprints he used to draw on the dining table, of the stories he told about the bridges he dreamed of building. I was proud to carry on his dream, even though I knew he had never regretted what he gave up for me. At the company, I was respected by my colleagues, not just for my abilities, but for how I treated people. I learned from my father that talent alone isn't enough. You need kindness. Once a colleague was struggling with a project, and I stayed at the office until midnight to help him finish the blueprints. When he thanked me, I just smiled. Consider it brain exercise. Even though my life is stable now, I never forget my roots. I still return to the town whenever I can, bringing small gifts for my father, a new coat, a better set of tools. But he always waves them off, saying he needs nothing except to see me happy. I look at him, his hair now streaked with gray, his hands still calloused. And I promise myself that I'll do even more so he can live an easier life without worrying about money or work. I'm not rich like the millionaires on TV with no expensive cars or grand houses, but I'm proud of what I've achieved through my own efforts. And more importantly, I'm proud to have an exemplary father like Thomas. He isn't just my father. He's my teacher, my friend, the greatest inspiration in my life. I thought my life was already complete until I met Amelia, the girl who changed everything, pulling me into a world I had never prepared to face. Amelia entered my life like a strange breeze, both gentle and strong, bringing with her both light and challenges that I could not foresee. I met Amelia during a major construction project that my company was handling, a commercial complex in the city center, where glass buildings shimmered as if challenging the sky. I was the project manager, while Amelia was the representative of the corporation owning the project, the daughter of Mr. Richard Baxter, a wealthy entrepreneur with a renowned reputation. The first time I met her, I was standing in the middle of the construction site, my shirt covered in dust, my hard hat tilted to one side, arguing with the construction team about a technical issue. Amelia appeared wearing an elegant white suit, her lightly curled brown hair cascading down, her blue eyes like a morning lake. She walked over, flashing a smile that was both professional and warm, and asked me about the project's progress. I responded, trying to keep my voice steady, but my heart was pounding wildly, not because of work pressure, but because of her. In the days that followed, we worked together more often. Amelia wasn't like what I imagined a rich heiress to be. She was intelligent, sharp, and had a way of conversing that made the other person feel respected. During meetings, she listened to my opinions, wasn't hesitant to ask questions, and sometimes burst into laughter when I told a clumsy story about my days back in the town. I began to realize that I looked forward to those meetings not just for the work, but for the moments of being close to her. Once, after a long day of work, she invited me for coffee to discuss more about the project. But when we sat in a small cafe with the warm golden lights illuminating her face, I knew the conversation had nothing to do with the construction anymore. Amelia told me about her life, vacations in Europe, lavish parties, but also the invisible pressures from her family. Her father, Mr. Baxter, was an ambitious man who always wanted her to become the perfect version of himself. Sometimes, she said, her eyes distant, I just want to be an ordinary person, living a life where no one notices. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt that even though we came from two different worlds, deep down we both yearned for something truly simple, to live true to our hearts. Our feelings grew from small moments. Once I accidentally spilled coffee on the blueprints, and Amelia laughed, grabbing a napkin to help wipe it off, her fingers accidentally brushing mine, making me feel like I'd been electrocuted. Another time, when the project hit a snag and I had to stay at the site until midnight, Amelia showed up with a box of homemade sandwiches saying she had accidentally made extras. I knew that wasn't true, but I didn't ask. I just smiled and devoured them, feeling like it was the best meal of my life. I loved Amelia, not for her appearance or her family background, but for the way she made me feel important. She didn't see me as a guy from a poor background, but as a man with value, with dreams. But I wasn't naive. I knew there was a huge gap between us. Not just money, but also the invisible prejudices of society. One evening, as we strolled along the riverbank, the city lights reflecting on the water, I held Amelia's hand and asked, "Have you ever thought that your family might oppose us?" She stopped walking, looked at me, her eyes shining with determination. "Hudson," she said, "I love you for who you are, not for your background. If my family doesn't understand that, then that's their problem, not ours." Our decision to move toward marriage came naturally, but no less thrilling. One evening in my small apartment, I knelt down, took Amelia's hand, and asked if she wanted to build a future with me. I didn't have an expensive ring, just a simple silver one that I'd saved a whole month's salary to buy. Amelia smiled, tears glistening, and nodded. In that moment, I felt like the whole world was mine. But that joy was quickly overshadowed by a new anxiety. I had to face her family. I knew that Amelia's parents, especially Mr. Baxter, wouldn't easily accept me. They lived in a world where status and money decided everything, while I was just an engineer guy from a small town, with a father who did odd jobs. I tried to reassure myself that our love was strong enough to overcome any barriers, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I wanted to bring Amelia home to meet my father so she could see the old wooden house where I grew up, so she could understand that I was proud of my roots. But I was also afraid that her family would look at my father with contemptuous eyes, and that made my heart ache. Amelia encouraged me, saying she would stand by me no matter what happened. I still vividly remember the day I brought Amelia to my small town. It was a spring afternoon when the wheat fields were turning lush green, and the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Amelia sat beside me in the old car I had bought with my savings, her eyes sparkling as she looked out the window as if discovering an entirely new world. I drove through the familiar red dirt roads, my heart pounding with both excitement and pride. I wanted her to see where I grew up, where my father had spent his entire life shielding me, where my values were shaped. When we pulled up in front of the wooden house, Amelia took my hand and smiled. "This is your home? It's so warm," she said, her voice sincere. I looked at the house, the faded tin roof, the crooked wooden fence, but also the small garden full of wildflowers that my father still tended to every day. My father stood at the door wearing his old checkered shirt, his smile radiant but unable to hide a hint of shyness. "Hello, Amelia," he said, his voice slightly trembling, and I knew he was as nervous as I was. Amelia stepped forward, hugging him as if he were a long-lost relative, and in that moment my heart felt like it was melting. That evening we sat around the small kitchen table. My father made his signature stew, the same one he used to cook when I was a child, its rich aroma filling the house. Amelia ate heartily, praising his cooking and asking him about his days as an engineer. My father spoke in his warm, steady voice, recounting the bridges he had built, the blueprints he sketched under the light of an oil lamp. Amelia listened, her eyes bright, and I realized that she didn't just respect my father. She genuinely cared for him. When he told the story of fixing Mrs. Mary's roof in the middle of a storm, Amelia laughed and squeezed my hand under the table. "You're just like Hudson," she said, always ready to help others without expecting anything in return. My father smiled, a rare smile that I knew meant he was truly happy. That moment made me certain that Amelia was the woman I wanted to build a future with. She didn't just love me, she valued my father and the principles I was raised with. But that joy was soon overshadowed when I thought about introducing my father to Amelia's family. I knew their world, of lavish mansions and extravagant parties, wouldn't welcome my father the way Amelia had. And that fear became reality when I brought him to meet her family. On that day, I tried to prepare both of us mentally. My father wore his old suit, the one he had worn to my college graduation, carefully combing his gray hair and adjusting his tie with trembling hands. I looked at him, my heart aching. He didn't say much, just patted my shoulder and smiled. "Don't worry, Hudson. I just want to see you happy." But I knew he was anxious, not because he feared judgment, but because he didn't want me to feel ashamed of him. That made me even more determined to protect him, though I wasn't sure what I was about to face. Amelia's family mansion was in an upscale suburb with tall iron gates and a perfectly manicured garden. As we stepped inside, I immediately felt the alienness of the place. There was no warmth of the wooden house, no familiar creak of the tin roof in the wind. Instead, I was met with gleaming marble floors, expensive paintings lining the walls, and a cold atmosphere that seemed designed to flaunt power and status. Mr. Richard Baxter and Mrs. Eleanor greeted us with polite smiles, but I noticed their eyes when they looked at my father. They weren't curious or friendly. They were eyes of judgment, comparison, and worse, subtle disdain. Dinner was served at a long table with fine porcelain plates, gleaming silver cutlery, and wine glasses that I knew cost enough to fix a dozen roofs for my father. Amelia sat beside me, trying to keep the mood light, but I could feel the tension in every word. Mr. Baxter started asking me about my work, but his questions soon turned to my father. "I hear you do construction work in your town?" he asked, his tone even but laced with a hint of mockery, as if construction work was something inferior. My father smiled and nodded. "Yes, I do odd jobs, fixing houses, building sheds, whatever people need." He spoke with genuine pride, but I saw Mrs. Eleanor raise an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with her husband as if they had just heard something absurd. I gripped Amelia's hand under the table, my fingers tightening so much I feared I might hurt her. Anger surged within me like a smoldering fire waiting for a gust of wind to erupt. I wanted to stand up and shout at them that my father was the greatest man I knew, that he had sacrificed his dreams to raise me, that those odd jobs had helped an entire town through tough times. But I didn't. I looked at my father, and his eyes, calm, patient, but hiding a subtle sadness, made me hold back. He was enduring this for me, so I wouldn't be put in an awkward position on this important day. Amelia sensed the tension. She jumped in, talking about her visit to my town, about how my father's stew was so delicious she wanted to have it again. But her words were like a fleeting breeze, not enough to dispel the heavy atmosphere. Mr. Baxter gave a faint smile and said, "It's admirable to have such simple people in society." The word simple in his mouth sounded like an insult. I wanted to retort, to defend my father, but Amelia squeezed my hand tightly, her eyes pleading with me to stay calm. I knew she was trying to protect me, to protect our love, but I couldn't bear the thought of my father being disrespected right in front of me. Even so, my father kept his smile, but I knew he was hiding his pain. I could see it in the way he lowered his head, in the slight tremble of his hand as he held his glass of water, in the way his answers became shorter than usual. He wasn't someone easily hurt, but I knew he was sensitive to those looks. When dinner ended, I walked my father to the car, my heart heavy as lead. Amelia followed, hugging me from behind and whispering, "I'm sorry, Hudson. I didn't expect them to act like that." I turned around, looked into her blue eyes, and saw the sincerity in them. I knew she wasn't to blame, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her family would never accept my father, and perhaps not even me. "It's okay," I said, though deep down I knew things wouldn't be simple. I hugged my father before he got into the car, feeling his frail frame through the suit jacket. "I'm proud of you, Dad," I whispered, and he just patted my shoulder, saying nothing, but his eyes seemed to say he was proud of me too. Yet deep within those eyes, I knew he was trying to hide his sadness. In the days that followed, Amelia did everything she could to comfort me. She called her mother, argued with her father, tried to make them understand that my father was a respectable man. But every time she recounted those conversations, I saw the disappointment in her eyes. Her family didn't change. "You're the most wonderful man I've ever met," she said one evening as we sat by the river, the city lights reflecting on the water. "And Mr. Thomas is the greatest father. I won't let them hurt you or him." I hugged her, feeling her love and determination, but I also knew she was caught in a struggle between her love for me and her loyalty to her family. I didn't want her to have to choose, but I also couldn't accept my father being disrespected. In the weeks following the tense launch event, Amelia and I dove into planning our wedding. I wanted a simple ceremony in my hometown, where my father could stand by my side, proud and at ease in his own world. I dreamed of an outdoor ceremony under the golden barley trees, surrounded by close friends and neighbors, those who had watched me grow up. But Amelia's family had other plans. Mr. Baxter declared that the wedding must be worthy of their family's reputation. "We can't let people think a Baxter daughter is getting married in a barn," he said, his tone half joking but laced with an insult I could feel. Amelia tried to protest, but her mother, Mrs. Eleanor, quickly intervened. "Amelia, you must think of the family's image. A grand wedding is essential." I gave in, not because I wanted to, but because I saw Amelia caught in the middle. She wanted to make me happy, but she also didn't want to disappoint her parents. I took her hand and told her I'd agree to anything she wanted as long as we were together. But deep down, I knew this decision would lead to consequences I hadn't foreseen. Amelia's family took full control of the wedding planning, from choosing the venue and guest list to even the menu. I felt like I was being pushed out of my own big day, but I held back, telling myself that as long as Amelia was happy, I could endure it. Then I uncovered the cruel arrangement by Amelia's family. One afternoon, when I visited the event planner's office to check on progress, I overheard a conversation between Mrs. Eleanor and the event manager. They were discussing the seating chart, and I heard Mrs. Eleanor say in a cold voice, "Place Mr. Thomas in the far corner near the service area. We don't want him ruining this special day." The manager nodded, jotting something down, and Mrs. Eleanor continued, "And make sure he doesn't speak. We need to maintain the family's dignity." I stood there, my blood boiling, my hands clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to barge in and shout that they had no right to treat my father this way, that he wasn't some invisible figure to be shoved into a corner like a discarded object. But I held back, not out of fear, but because I knew that causing a scene would only make things worse. I left the office, my heart heavy, feeling as though I'd been betrayed, not just by Amelia's family, but by my own silence. The final days before the wedding passed in a whirlwind of anxiety and preparations. Then our big day arrived, faster than I had imagined. That morning I woke up in the luxurious hotel room Amelia's family had booked for me, with a view of the bustling city, but I couldn't care less about the scenery. I put on the wedding suit, a sleek black ensemble Amelia had carefully chosen, paired with a blue tie. Her favorite color, the color of the sky on the day we first met. Looking in the mirror, I saw a man about to step into marriage, hair neatly combed, a forced smile on his lips. But in those eyes was chaos, joy mixed with fear, hope tangled with seething anger. I smoothed the tie, whispering to my reflection, "This is your day, Hudson. Don't let them ruin it." I arrived at the venue early, wanting to check everything, to sneak a final glance at the seating chart to ensure my father's place wasn't too awful. The venue was a masterpiece of opulence, towering white marble columns supporting a vaulted ceiling, massive crystal chandeliers sparkling like thousands of fallen stars, and white roses arranged in grand arches along the aisle. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the excited murmurs of staff bustling about. 30 minutes later, guests began to arrive. Businessmen in tailored suits, elegant women with glittering diamond necklaces, all friends and business associates of Amelia's family. They shook my hand, offering florid congratulations. Best wishes, Hudson. Amelia's a wonderful bride. I smiled, nodded, made polite small talk about work and the weather, but my mind was fixed on one person, my father. He arrived a bit later, entering through a side door as if not wanting to disturb anyone. He wore his old, meticulously cleaned and pressed suit, the tie slightly askew because he wasn't used to formal wear. His posture was slightly stooped, his silver hair falling messily over his forehead, but the smile on his face was as warm as those mornings in our hometown. He approached me, patting my shoulder with his familiar steady voice. "You look handsome, Hudson. Today's yours and Amelia's day. I'm proud of you." I hugged him, breathing in the simple scent of soap on him, the smell of the humble days I cherished. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered, my voice catching. "Where are you sitting?" He pointed to a far corner where a small table was placed near the service area, its view obstructed by a large pillar. "It's fine, son. I'll sit there and watch." The event manager, a young woman with a professional smile, led my father to his seat. It wasn't literally next to the trash cans, but it was far enough to ensure he wouldn't appear in any memorable photos, far enough to push him out of the circle of light surrounding the distinguished guests. He sat quietly, his calloused hands resting on his lap, watching the crowd with a faint smile. No one approached him. They were too busy discussing soaring stocks, private vacations in the Maldives, things my father's world, of small construction projects and simple meals, had never touched. The ceremony began, and the moment Amelia entered, everything seemed to pause. She looked like a vision in her pristine white wedding dress, delicate lace hugging her frame, her hair swept up with white roses tucked in, and her green eyes sparkling under the lights. She looked at me, her smile radiant like a spring sun, and my heart melted. We exchanged vows under the floral arch, promising a future together, to face all challenges as one. And in that moment, I truly believed our love was strong enough to banish any darkness. The officiant smiled, the guests applauded, and as we kissed, the violins swelled, and I thought, maybe everything will be okay. But when the ceremony ended and the reception began, the pain returned, sharper and more merciless than ever. Cheerful music filled the air, wine glasses were topped up, and guests began dancing and laughing boisterously. Amelia's family, the Baxters, started introducing their relatives, turning the ritual into a parade of ostentation. Mr. Baxter spoke first, his voice booming through the microphone, introducing his brother, a renowned lawyer known for billion-dollar cases, with grandiose words. "This is our family's hero, bringing justice to countless businesses." The guests erupted in applause, warm hugs exchanged. Then Mrs. Eleanor introduced her aunt, recounting her charity work in Africa that changed thousands of children's lives. Another round of applause, more effusive praise echoing through the hall. I sat there beside Amelia, but my eyes kept darting to my father. He was still alone in his corner, a glass of wine untouched in his hand, his gaze sweeping the crowd like a distant observer. This was the man who had sacrificed his entire life for me, giving up career opportunities to stay in our hometown after Mom died, working manual labor from dawn to dusk so I could have books and meals, teaching me to live with kindness and resilience. Yet here he was, treated as an afterthought, a lonely shadow at his own son's wedding, pushed out of the spotlight to preserve the Baxters' dignity. The pain wasn't a fleeting sting, it was a smoldering ache, spreading through me like a fever. My heart felt constricted, as if an invisible hand were squeezing my throat, making each breath a struggle. My eyes burned, but I blinked back tears, not wanting Amelia to notice. I wanted to leap up, rush to the microphone, pull my father to the center of the hall, and declare to everyone, "This is Mr. Thomas, my father. The man who sacrificed everything so I could be here today. He's a brilliant engineer, a great father, a citizen our town respects more than anyone. I imagined the scene. Thunderous applause, admiring glances toward him, and a proud smile on his face. But reality yanked me back. If I did that, the wedding would descend into chaos. Guests would whisper, Mr. Baxter would be furious, and Amelia, she would cry. I couldn't put her through more pain. Amelia sensed my unease. She gripped my hand under the table, her fingers squeezing gently, whispering, Hudson, are you okay? I love you. I turned to her, forcing a smile, kissing her cheek. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a bit emotional. But she knew. Her green eyes flickered with guilt as she glanced at my father. She had tried. She had argued with her parents, begged them to change the seating. But her family was too powerful, too accustomed to controlling everything. I didn't blame her. I just felt lonelier than ever. The turmoil inside me raged like a furious storm. One part, the rational part, the part that loved Amelia deeply, whispered to stay calm, to let the day pass peacefully. Just one day, Hudson, it said. You'll have a lifetime to prove your father's worth. But another part, the part raised by my father's lessons on self-respect, justice, and never bowing to injustice, screamed for action. It reminded me of the times he stood in the rain fixing a neighbor's roof, of his words, Son, a person's value isn't in what they have, but in what they give. How could I sit here laughing with those who disrespected him while he sat alone in a corner, isolated and out of place? How could I balance justice with happiness? If I stayed silent, I'd carry this regret for life. But if I spoke out, I risked losing Amelia, or worse, hurting her. I gripped my wine glass so tightly it creaked. My mind flooded with worst-case scenarios. A ruined wedding, my father leaving in tears, Amelia looking at me with eyes full of disappointment. Time seemed to slow, each minute an ordeal. I glanced at the clock, counting the seconds until the guest speeches. Maybe someone would mention my father? But no, the program was meticulously orchestrated by Amelia's family. Only toasts from business partners and high society friends. My father remained there, now slightly hunched, as if sinking into his own memories. I imagined him thinking of my mother, of the days when our family was whole, of the dreams he once had before everything changed. The pain spread, making the air in the hall feel suffocatingly thick. I wanted to run to him, sit down, hug him, and whisper, Dad, I'm sorry. I won't let them do this again. But my feet felt nailed to the floor, and all I could do was watch, helpless. Then, amid the laughter and music, I saw Mayor Johnson enter the hall. He was an honored guest of the bride's family, a tall man with a silver beard and a friendly smile, carrying himself with confidence but not arrogance. He shook hands with Mr. Baxter, exchanging brief pleasantries, and I heard Mr. Baxter introduce him to the guests. Mayor Johnson, a great friend of our family. Applause erupted, but my heart pounded harder, not because of his arrival, but because a memory flashed in my mind. I remembered my father talking about Mayor Johnson. My father had volunteered to repair neighbors' homes after a flood, and even helped provide technical expertise to rebuild the town's small bridge. He's a good man, Hudson, my father had said, his voice full of respect. He never forgets what others do for him. That memory was like a ray of light in the dark tunnel I was lost in. I thought perhaps this was my chance, a way to reclaim justice for my father without hurting Amelia. I took a deep breath, stood up, and excused myself to Amelia with a strained smile. I'm going to say hello to someone, okay? She nodded, her eyes worried but asking no questions. I wove through the crowd, feeling the curious glances of the guests, Amelia's family's friends, who looked at me like an outsider in their world. I approached Mayor Johnson, my heart pounding as if I were stepping into a battle I wasn't sure I'd win. When he turned and recognized me, his smile widened. Hudson, the groom of the day. Congratulations, he said warmly, his large hand clapping my shoulder. Thank you, sir, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I'd like to talk to you about something if you have a few minutes. He raised an eyebrow, his expression curious but still kind. I led him to a quieter corner near the balcony where the music and chatter were less overwhelming. I took another deep breath, summoning the courage to say what was on my mind. Do you remember my father, Mr. Thomas? I began, my voice slightly trembling. He's here, but he's being treated unfairly. I know you've known him, worked with him. I'm hoping you can help me. Help my father get the recognition he deserves. Mayor Johnson looked at me, his gaze softening as if he could sense the pain I carried. Thomas, he said, his voice lowering. Of course I remember him. A remarkable man. He's done so much for me in the town. He paused, scanning the hall, his eyes settling on the far corner where my father sat. What do you want me to do, Hudson? He asked, his tone sincere. I swallowed hard, feeling as if my heart were hanging in the balance. I don't want to ruin the wedding, I said, but I want my father to be respected. He doesn't deserve to be pushed into a corner like this. If you could say something during the speeches about what my father has done, I'd be grateful to you for the rest of my life. Mayor Johnson placed his hand on my shoulder, nodding slowly. You're a good son, Hudson. I'll see what I can do. He smiled. A flicker of hope sparked within me, but at the same time a new worry surfaced. If Mr. Baxter found out what I'd said to Mayor Johnson, would he be furious? Would Amelia be caught in an even more awkward position? But there was no time to dwell on it. I returned to my seat, trying to maintain a calm expression, but inside, I was balancing on a knife's edge, waiting for the pivotal moment. Each step back to the banquet table felt like walking a tightrope, torn between loyalty to my father and love for Amelia. I sat down beside her, forcing a smile, but my hands trembled slightly as I touched my wine glass, my eyes unable to stray from my father. Then the moment arrived. The MC, a man with a resonant voice and a professional smile, stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, next we'll hear a speech from a special guest, Mayor Johnson, a dear friend of the Baxter family. Applause roared through the hall, eyes turning toward Mayor Johnson as he stepped onto the stage, his black suit impeccable and his silver beard glinting under the chandeliers. I gripped Amelia's hand tightly, my heart pounding as if it might burst from my chest. This is it, I thought. This is the chance for my father to be recognized, for his honor to be restored. Mayor Johnson smiled, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on me for a moment as if to reassure me. He cleared his throat, his warm voice resonating through the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a special day. A day we witness the love of Hudson and Amelia, two wonderful people who found each other in a turbulent world. I'm honored to be here, not only because of my friendship with the Baxter family, but for another special reason. He paused and the hall fell silent, save for the faint strains of a violin in the distance. My throat felt dry, my breath nearly stopping. Today, he continued, I want to honor a man present here, a man who is not only the father of the groom, but also a quiet hero of our community. Mr. Thomas, a talented engineer, a remarkable father, and a citizen this city deeply cherishes. The hall was utterly still, as if time itself had paused. I turned to look at my father, seeing him lift his head, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and unease. Guests began to murmur, glancing around to find the Mr. Thomas Mayor Johnson spoke of. My heart pounded harder, swelling with both pride and fear. Mayor Johnson continued, his voice rising and falling like a fairy tale. Years ago, when Hudson's hometown was devastated by floods, it was Mr. Thomas who stepped up to repair homes for dozens of families, including my own. He didn't just fix roofs, he provided technical expertise to rebuild the bridge connecting our town to the outside world. He never asked for anything, not a single penny, because he believed helping others was the right thing to do. He paused, looking directly at my father with a smile. Mr. Thomas, you are a man of honor, and today I want to thank you, not just from me, but from our entire community. Applause began, hesitant at first, then growing stronger, spreading through the hall like a wave. I looked at my father, who stood up slightly awkward, nodding his thanks with a shy smile. I glanced at Mr. Baxter and Mrs. Eleanor, seeing them frozen in their seats, their faces pale, their eyes wavering between surprise and embarrassment. They hadn't expected the man they'd dismissed, the one they'd relegated to a corner to preserve appearances, to be so revered by the mayor. Then something even more unexpected happened. An older man in a gray suit stood up from a nearby table. I recognized him. Mr. Peterson, an old neighbor from our town who my father had helped rebuild a stable after a fire. "I'd like to add something," Mr. Peterson said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Mr. Thomas didn't just help me rebuild my stable. He lent me tools when I couldn't afford to buy them. He's the best man I've ever known." Another woman stood up, Mrs. Clara, who had once asked my father to fix her plumbing when her house was flooding. "Mr. Thomas worked all night to save my floors from water damage. He didn't take a single cent," she said, her voice full of gratitude. The hall erupted in applause, no longer tentative but a heartfelt wave of emotion. The guests, who had initially come to celebrate a lavish wedding, now looked at my father with a different gaze, one of admiration and respect. My father stood there, his hands trembling slightly as he nodded his thanks, his eyes glistening not with sadness but with a rare happiness he seldom showed. Amelia gripped my hand tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she smiled, whispering, "Hudson, he deserves this." I nodded, feeling as if a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. I stood up, unable to hold back any longer, and walked toward my father. The crowd was still applauding, the violin music fading into a soft hum, and I felt every eye on me. But I didn't care. All I saw was my father, the man in the worn suit with his silver hair falling messily over his forehead with a shy but radiant smile. As I approached, he opened his arms and I rushed into his embrace, holding him tightly as if trying to hold on to all the years he had sacrificed for me. "I'm proud of you, Dad," I whispered, my voice choked, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. He patted my back gently, his voice warm and steady. "I'm proud of you too, Hudson. Always have been." Guests began to approach, people who just minutes ago didn't even know who my father was. Mr. Peterson, our old neighbor, took my father's hand, saying, "Thomas, I never got the chance to thank you enough for what you did for my family." Mrs. Clara, who had once asked my father to fix her plumbing, hugged him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You're a savior to our whole town." Even strangers, friends of Amelia's family, came to shake his hand, offering words of congratulations and gratitude. I stood there, watching my father, surrounded by respect, and felt my heart begin to heal. Amelia approached, wrapping her arms around my father, and I saw in her eyes not only love for me but a deep respect for him. "Mr. Thomas, I'm so lucky to have you as my father-in-law," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. My father smiled, the brightest smile I'd ever seen, and replied, "Little lady, thank you for making Hudson happy." In that moment, I knew Amelia wasn't just my wife, but someone who would help me build a family where my father would always be cherished. I glanced at Mr. Baxter and Mrs. Eleanor, who had quietly returned to their table, their faces now a portrait of shame and discomfort. Mr. Baxter no longer carried his usual air of arrogance. He bowed his head, pretending to be occupied with his wine glass, but I saw his hands tremble slightly. Mrs. Eleanor clutched her napkin tightly, her eyes flickering between my father and Mayor Johnson, as if trying to comprehend how things had turned out this way. They hadn't expected the man they'd dismissed, the one they'd pushed to a corner to preserve appearances, to become the center of admiration from the very people they respected most. I didn't need to say anything to them. The truth had spoken for me, through Mayor Johnson's words, through the stories of Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Clara, through the resounding applause. But I didn't let myself get swept up in triumph. I didn't want revenge or to further embarrass Amelia's family. I only wanted my father to be recognized, and that had come to pass. I decided to keep my conversation with Mayor Johnson a secret. I didn't want Amelia or her family to know I had quietly taken action. Not out of fear, but because I wanted to keep our marriage peaceful. to spare Amelia the burden of more family conflict. I looked at her, seeing her smile at my father, and I knew she would understand even if I never told her. The reception continued, but the atmosphere had transformed entirely. My father was no longer the man sitting quietly in the corner. He was invited to the dance floor, pulled into conversations, treated like an honored guest. I saw him laugh more, talk more, and for the first time that evening he seemed like himself, the proud, strong, and deeply kind man I had grown up beside. I took Amelia's hand, pulling her onto the dance floor, and as we twirled under the chandeliers, I felt the pain dissolve. "I love you," I whispered, and she smiled, replying, "I love you too, Hudson. And I love your family." As the reception drew to a close, I walked my father to his car, feeling as though I had just crossed a volcano without being burned. He took my hand, his eyes shining with a happiness I knew he had long suppressed. "Today was a wonderful day, Hudson," he said. "Not just because you found happiness, but because you made me feel like I'm not invisible." His words left me speechless, and I hugged him tightly, vowing to myself that I would never let him feel that way again. Amelia's family, though they said nothing, had clearly learned a lasting lesson. In the days that followed, I noticed a shift in how they treated me and my father. Mr. Baxter spoke less, but he began asking about my work with a hint of respect instead of his usual sarcasm. Mrs. Eleanor, though still maintaining her cool exterior, stopped mentioning family appearances. I wasn't sure if their hearts had truly changed, or if they were merely trying to salvage their reputation after the awkward moment at the wedding, but it didn't matter anymore. With Amelia's love by my side, I felt as though I had crossed a volcano, not only unscathed, but stronger than ever. In the days after the wedding, Amelia and I began building our life together. We moved into a small apartment in the suburbs, not as lavish as her family's mansion, but cozy enough to feel like a modern version of the wooden house I grew up in. Amelia loved decorating the place, placing small pots of wildflowers on the balcony, reminiscent of my father's garden, and every time I saw her tending to them, my heart swelled with love. "This is our home, Hudson," she said one afternoon as we sat on the sofa, sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating her face. "It doesn't need to be grand. Just you and me." I pulled her close, kissing her soft brown hair, and felt a simple but profound happiness. My father visited us often, and each time he came, I saw Amelia treat him like a true father. She cooked his recipe for beef stew, calling him for step-by-step instructions, and the three of us would sit around the table laughing and talking like a real family. My father grew more open, sharing everyday stories, and sometimes he spoke of my mother with a sad but loving smile. Amelia listened, sometimes holding his hand, and I knew she didn't just love me. She cherished the values my father had instilled in me. The relationship between our families gradually became more harmonious, though not without some lingering tension. Mr. Baxter and Mrs. Eleanor kept their distance, but they no longer showed contempt for my father. Once Mr. Baxter invited him to play golf, an invitation I knew was his attempt at reconciliation, though he'd never admitted. My father, with his characteristic simplicity, laughed heartily and said, "I don't know how to play golf, but if you want, I can fix the roof of your shed." That remark made Amelia and me burst into laughter, and I saw Mr. Baxter smile, a rare but genuine smile. Mrs. Eleanor, though still rigid, began asking my father about the wildflowers in his garden, and I realized that, however slowly, they were learning to respect him. A year after the wedding, Amelia became pregnant. When she told me the news, I held her tightly, tears streaming down my cheeks. I thought of my father, how he had raised me alone after my mother's death, and I vowed to be as good a father as he had been. When we shared the news with him, he sat quietly for a moment, then broke into the brightest smile I'd ever seen. "I'm going to be a grandfather," he said, his voice choked, pulling both me and Amelia into a tight hug. He began crafting a wooden cradle for his grandchild, spending every evening after work in his small backyard workshop, meticulously carving each detail as if pouring all his love into it. When our son was born, A healthy boy with green eyes like his mother's. I named him Thomas, after my father. The day my father came to the hospital and held his grandson, I saw him cry, tears of joy he had long held back. "Thank you, Hudson," he whispered, for giving me a family. Those words left me speechless, and I realized that everything I had done, from fighting to protect his honor at the wedding to building a new life with Amelia, was to bring joy to the man who had given me everything. Looking back on that journey, I learned a profound lesson. A person's value lies not in what they possess, but in what they give. My father taught me that, not through words, but through how he lived. Through the roofs he fixed, the bridges he built, and the unconditional love he gave me. I also learned that love, no matter how strong, needs to be protected with courage and resolve. I nearly let my father be forgotten on my wedding day. But thanks to Mayor Johnson and the kind neighbors, I restored his honor. My advice from what I've been through is to always stand up for those you love, no matter how hard it is. Don't let prejudice or others' arrogance dim their worth. Fight, not with anger, but with sincerity and self-respect, as my father lived his entire life. Amelia and I now live a simple but happy life with our son Thomas and my father's frequent visits. Each time I see him playing with his grandson, telling stories about our small town, my heart overflows. Life isn't always easy, but with Amelia's love, my father's presence, and the lessons I've learned, I know we'll overcome any challenge. And every time I look into my son's eyes, I see my father's light, the light of a man who spent his life loving and sacrificing. And I vow to live in a way that honors that light.